Welcome back to our weekly book study, book discussion on the book Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, Elder Thaddeus. This week we had a very short chapter on monasticism. Um, and, I said that because it's short, we could also bring any questions we had from last week. Now, I want to address something first because I need to ask your forgiveness, especially Jerry. I said that we would discuss your question this week, but I got caught up in feast day preparations, and I just am not prepared. So if we can leave it for our last meeting next week for the season, we'll address it next week if that's okay. Just give me the thumbs up if that's okay. Even if it's not okay, I can't discuss it today. But anyway, I do want to. I want to address it. So we'll talk about it next week. This week, like we said, the topic is on monasticism. It's only five points, 5 paragraphs. But again, with the whole book, there are things that we can pick up on and interpret in these 5 paragraphs. So I'm just going to talk about one. And if we could talk about the rest together, more discussion like we have been, that would be nice too. Let me pick which one I want to talk about, though. I haven't thought about it. I know that number 4 is going to be a nice group discussion because we've already kind of started to talk about this, about how life in the monastery differs from our lives in the world. So we can save that one until we're kind of doing more of a group discussion. I'm going to talk about number 1 briefly, where he says that monastic service is a living example of sanctity and nobility, and that there are very few examples in life that are really examples of sanctity and nobility, or he puts it a different way too. He said we hear a lot of words basically about how we should live today, but there are not a lot of examples. And this kind of brought to mind, I thought about, like, what are the examples in the world that we have of saints, or what are examples that we can follow and emulate in the world. And of course that those are the examples of those saints, and we have a lot of modern day saints that are being canonized, and those are really the few examples that we have. You think in the Synaxarion that we read during matins, whenever we have matins, the saints of the day, there's always a big list, and we have hundreds, thousands of saints that we don't even know some of their stories. There are so many, and there are so many examples that could be out there of how we should live our lives, and that follow that paradigm. And there could be people in the world, in corners of the world, that aren't so connected, maybe not even in monasteries, just in more remote places, who are living saintly lives. And because they don't encounter people, we don't know about their example until much later, if they write something, or if it's discovered after they've reposed or anything like that, then we have their example. So he's talking about how, we hear so many times how we should live, we should do this, we should be more loving, we should, so on and so forth. And he's saying that, those are just words. We don't have a lot of real examples. And he talks about how those words, he says it's questionable whether we can apply that in our lives. People can say, I can sit here and say, Jerry, you should live this way in your life, or Rita, you should live this way, or Dimitri and Susan, you should live this way. But ultimately, you don't know if you can apply that in your life. I think what he means here is kind of twofold, where he means, it may just not apply to us. Certain things certain ways of life may not apply to us, depending on where we live or what age we live in, but also spiritually, where we currently are in our spiritual journey towards God, whether we're just starting out, whether we haven't even acknowledged that there is a journey to have towards God, or whether we're kind of a little bit closer and have been had more experiences of God's grace and in our lives, and so it's he says it's questionable whether we can apply all of those things to our life. So a father might say, or one of the we may read from the fathers, certain ways to live, but not all of them might apply to us, depending on all of those variables in our life. But he says, however, when we see a person who is peaceful and quiet, meek and humble, who does not know anger, forgives every insult, covering everything with love, such a person is a living example, and we should strive to be like him. One cannot conquer evil with evil. One can only conquer evil with good. So we just had yesterday, the day before for Vespers, we celebrated the patron saint of our church, Saint Nektarios. And this last sentence where he says, "One cannot conquer evil with evil. One can only conquer evil with good." There's a modern example for us. Of course, he reposed in the 20s or 1920, and so he's not so recent, like some of the more recent saints, Saint Paisios, and in the 90s even. But ultimately, his example is so simple; it can be applied to our lives. And Saint Nectarios' example is that one of when we are being persecuted, when we're being, when someone is spreading slander about us, lying about us to others, in this day and age, and in our society, and in American culture, when someone does that to us, when someone says something about us or says something against us, whether it's to our face or behind our back, what's the first thing that we do? We jump to defend ourselves. We say, no, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. That wasn't me. Or we say, oh, that person is a liar. They're not saying that's not true about me. And Saint Nectarios' example is that is not how we should live. Those things that he endured in his life, those exact things, really, that slander and those words against him, that ultimately led to him being exiled, and we've heard so many times that in Greece they didn't even want to have his funeral in the church. They wouldn't, but why is that? Why did they treat him that way even after he died? Well, it's because of how he responded. He didn't respond. He responded by being silent, by taking those blows and continuing to live a righteous life. He loved those people still, and he just moved on. He kept going. And for us, that can be one of the most difficult things we hear. It's difficult when someone is, or something is out there. People are saying, "Oh, I heard that so and so did this and that and this and that," and they try and defend themselves because our name is very important to us and our pride is very important to us. But he shows us a different way in his example that if we just are silent, if we continue, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, just keep going in life, God will glorify us. And Saint Nectarios shows true humility as described by Elder Thaddeus here, and He doesn't attempt to um, change people's minds about him through his words, but through his actions. And that's what speaks the most. That's what speaks volumes about our patron saint, and that's why so many people love him, and so many people pray to him and ask for his intercessions, because we all go through that. Whether you're, 5 years old or 80 years old, at one time in your life, you'll be talked about by other people. False things may be said about you. And a lot of times we don't even know when that happens. And people start to treat us differently, but we don't understand why. And it can lead to grief, and it can lead to depression, and, not understanding what's going on. So we have to always remember that being humble and being prayerful is the most important thing. And he says there, when we encounter someone like that, like St. Nektarios, the people who did encounter him understood that he was holy. And they understood who he was without him probably even saying a word. But he interacted with people with so much love and compassion, even though he was treated, very, very poorly by his fellow clergymen, even. And so, this number one speaks volumes. When we see someone who is truly holy and living in these ways that Elder Thaddeus has described in the other chapters, it's important for us to strive to be like them. Then, we also think about that other sentence back there where he says, not, it can't always apply to us. The lives of the saints are meant to be emulated, but not duplicated. Just because, for example, St. Anthony dropped everything and went into the desert, that's not necessarily going to be the same thing that we have to do. That's not necessarily what would apply to our life, but we take his example of removing parts of the world in our life, even briefly, so that we can emulate some of that holiness that they have and that they had. Does anyone have any comments on that? I spoke for a long time, but that was from my heart. Any comments, questions? I see some no's, and then I see some no videos. Okay. If there's no questions or comments on that part, let's start to hear from you on the other parts. So number two, briefly, I'll just say he talks about how the people at the monks at the monasteries come from all different places. He talks about how a community, like a monastic community, where people come from different places and different circumstances, it's important to not be sensitive and not to offend others there, but also so that we can gradually become of one mind and one thought. I think of the church that way too. I mean, I think of church communities that way, where we can't be too hard on people. Well, first of all, the church itself, we have to think of the church as the hospital. And we are all the sick people going to the hospital. So every time we go to the church, and perhaps we see someone, we're tempted to see something in someone that makes us judge them, we have to remember first that we are going there ourselves because we are sick, we are suffering, we are sinners, but our neighbor is also going there for the same reasons and different reasons, whatever things that are going on in their life, or whatever sickness they're trying to get the cure for. because the cure is Christ, right? They are going to the hospital as well, and your priests as well. We are sick as well. We always ask for God's forgiveness, and we ask for God as the physician of our souls and bodies to heal us. And so, in the same way, in number 2, that he's talking about how we have to tolerate one another in a community, so that we can gradually become of one mind and one thought. And that one mind and one thought is Christ, to be followers of God, and to be of one mind. And I mean, we say it in the liturgy: "Let us love one another, that with one mind we may confess." And that one mind that we have to be of is that of Christ. We have to have Christ on our mind. We have to be oriented towards God all the time. And we have to, as a community, as the body of Christ, that's the only way we become the body of Christ, is together. But here he says too, like in a monastery, he says the abbot should serve as the example to the rest of the brethren, right? So you're in a church, in a community, your priests are called to the same thing. If your priests want you to live Christian lives, we must be the example. And this even kind of refers back to number 1, saying that, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. See, what did I tell you? I'm saying that that we as priests should be the example in the community, so that if we are the examples, like in number 1 that he's talking about, if we are living our lives peacefully, and if we can learn the right kind of silence, and being meek and being humble, and not being angry or insulted, or just giving love to everything, then the people in our community, you, the faithful, will emulate what we're doing, and ultimately we will all be of one mind, the way he says here. Just like in the monastery, the monks will be of one mind with their abbot, with their leader, with their, the person who's spiritually leading them. And he says in the last sentence there, if the abbot, if he is dissatisfied, then the whole brotherhood is dissatisfied. It's just interesting. Okay, I've talked enough. Let's hear from you now.
Well, sorry.
No, go on.
Hey, it's Tina. But I had a question from the earlier one. I just thought of it.
Okay.
And you say instead of arguing or being combative or whatever with trying to defend yourself, when does it become, like, I know we're taught to turn the other cheek, but when does it become abuse, And you need to defend yourself.
Well, I mean, of course, it's dependent on the situation. But, if we are trying to be loving, even in a situation where we're being attacked, I don't know. I don't know. Me, Father Nektarios' answer is, eventually I would defend myself, but I think our Lord would just want us to keep, trying to respond in love, and knowing. I mean, ultimately, we do the best that we can, and we're human. We're broken, and eventually we'll probably have to defend ourselves, but it depends on the situation as well. I mean, Saint Nektarios, you could argue that Saint Nektarios was abused. I mean, but he, there are no accounts of him ever defending himself. I mean, he was sent away. He was exiled. So I don't know. I mean, it goes pretty far. Our Lord was crucified. Did he ever defend himself? No. So I don't know if I have a clear answer, but if I look to our Lord, we're called to take that abuse until our crucifixion. You know what I mean? Until our whatever the situation is ends. I don't know. I mean, we're theoretically speaking here. I'm not saying, if your life is in danger, obviously you're going to defend yourself,
Right.
in physical terms and in things like, I'm not saying you just lay there and do nothing, but I think we're speaking more in terms of verbal things and sort of abstract, you know, uh, ways of being attacked as well.
Right. That's what I was wondering. It's like, what do you do when somebody lies about you and everything?
It's hard. It's temptation to defend ourselves, and many times we just will. It's almost natural. It's almost become natural for us to do that, and that's what the saints are calling us to try not to do. And to, if we're going to respond with love and cover it with love. And when someone is when someone is bullying someone else, or when someone is being rude to someone else, there's the reason people say kill them with kindness. If you return negativity with positivity, then chances are the negativity is just going to lose steam, and there's nothing left for the negative person to say. If you show love, if you respond with love to hatred with love, there's only so much that hatred can do. Ultimately, like we said, depending on the situation, it's not absolute.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Father, also, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I also think, I think we're humans, and I think we have the right to defend ourselves, but I think it's how we do it that really matters. And I think just communicating in a loving manner, I think that would be all right, if we felt like we had to defend ourselves. So it's just all about how you communicate.
I agree.
Yeah.
Very good.
May I also say something else about number 2? We're looking at number 2, coming from a monastery, coming from a church, coming from a sacred place. But you can also apply it like to any situation, like to a work environment where you're working with individuals who, who have grown up in different circumstances, in different families. And some are insensitive, some are sensitive, some are, easy to work with, some are not. And I think it's really important to be able to take a lot of these teachings to communities where we spend a lot of our time, not just within the church.
I agree. I mean, it applies. I mean, it applies to our homes. It really does. We have to be, the right kind of sensitive, the right amount of those things. But it's interesting that he says tolerate one another. He doesn't say like, just accept one another no matter what. But he says, even tolerate to me is like, even if you don't like someone, understand that you're there in the community together. And he talks about that in number 4, where we're going to probably talk a lot about, where he says that, actually, no, I'm sorry, number 5, where he says that, that even in the monasteries, even if you think it's peaceful and quiet there, it's not. It's a battlefield. And he means that in a spiritual sense, but I think, too, he means in an anthropological sense that, you're putting a bunch of people could be from all over the world together. and they have to do what he's saying in number 2 and tolerate each other to understand that the greater goal of the monastery is not, this monk's ideas or this monk's ideas or even the abbot's ideas. It's to follow Christ, and it's to pray to God unceasingly.
Right.
And that is the one mind that a monastery has to be of. And they all have to get on board with that, or, you see monks leave monasteries, for whatever personal reasons or whatever it is. So they just have to understand that, why they're there. And we have to understand in our church community why we're there. And it's easy if we're sitting in the pews and we notice someone in front of us doing something that perhaps irritates us, to turn our attention away from prayer, which is why we're there, and for healing of our sicknesses, because we said it's a hospital, and to judge that person instead. It's so easy because our eyes like to wander, our mind likes to wander. But we're called here, and what he's saying here is we have to tolerate each other. And whether that's, what we see in church that could annoy us or whatever happens.
Hello, Father, and happy belated.
Mr. Bruce.
I don't want to press you when you're tired, and you might need some backup, but I don't know about everybody else, but I would appreciate an hour just to discuss this one subject of as Christians, as Orthodox Christians, when is enough enough? Like, where are the lines of tolerance and acceptance and repentance and forgiveness and all of these things? Because especially in this day and age, whether it's in the workplace or in the streets, or right, that we are now constantly barraged with these opportunities to make a choice. And I know we all want to make the right choice, but and absolutely, Christ, our Lord, was ultimately crucified.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think, and I know we must all crucify certain aspects of our life, but we must defend ourselves and our faith. And you know what I'm saying. I would just really appreciate an opportunity for us to get in deep on some of this stuff, mm-hmm. to really kind of have if it can be determined.
I agree. I mean, in terms
of the line.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of of words, you're right. There is a balance. So there are saints who defended their faith by not saying a word and dying, right? When they were told, renounce Christianity, renounce Christ, and be a pagan or whatever, or die, they shut their mouth or whatever, and they died for Christ. They died for their faith. But there are also other fathers who not so much did things to defend the faith per se, because the faith Christ does not need defending, first of all, right? But they wrote things, right? We have the 3 hierarchs who wrote so many things. We have the other fathers throughout the church who wrote all kinds of things. It was more to defend. It was to defend against different things, of course. It was, heresies and different ideologies. But it was to disseminate the truth. It's not so much to defend anything. It wasn't so much to defend anything, but more to proclaim what the truth was. How that translates to us as modern Christians it would be a very, I think, lengthy discussion. But we also, Christ is our ultimate example. And I said that last week too. And when we talked about humility, that was the big message. And the saints as well. Christ first, of course, but the saints as well. And it's hard to define where that line is, because it also depends on the situation. Mm-hmm. In the sense of, like, a martyr like Saint Demetrius, let's say, for example, who was in prison, and they came to him and they said, renounce Christ. If he used words there, it wouldn't have mattered. It would have fallen on deaf ears. He was already imprisoned. His death would have been, his words would have been just words, and no one would have actually heard him. But his death, the way he died, spoke more than any words could give. Instead of talking until his death, we assume anyway, we don't know for sure, obviously, but he took it silently. He took his death just like Christ did. And, as much as we can in arguments and in whatever's going on, in whatever situation it is, we are to do the same. If someone wants to crucify us, let them crucify us. If that's the thing, but, we don't mean it literally, of course. But I take the turning of the cheek quite literally. We're not called to sit there and argue, which is so easy to do now, especially with social media. And it happens every single day. There are arguments all over Facebook about what the church thinks and what we're doing wrong and why we're doing it wrong. And, we can get caught up in these arguments for days and days and days and days. And what is it? What do these arguments do? Exactly what the evil one is trying to do: deter us from Christ, take away our attention from Christ, and to divide us as brothers and sisters. So, is it better for us to argue back, or is it better for us to be silent, take whatever attack is coming at us, and move on? Or love the person back, or whatever response is appropriate. There are some situations where silence, and it's not ignorance, it's not ignoring someone. If someone says something to you, you acknowledge what they say, and you choose not to respond, or you choose, whatever it is. But it's more. Go ahead, Becky.
Sorry.
No.
I've had more of the battle with myself rather than with what others are saying. The battle has been, I've felt like a petulant child of God this whole week. And it's like, everything I've prayed for seems like it goes in the opposite direction. And I'm thinking, what's going on, God? Are you sure you're in? When I think about people's arguments and people's things and everything, it's like I'm doing it to myself rather than hearing it from others. And that's what I'm battling. I'm battling my own thoughts about, are you sure you know what you're doing, God? I know this is your planet. I know this is your world, but I don't like it right now. And I have, in fact, on Sunday when I was getting ready to come to communion, I thought, I cannot go up to communion and not ask for forgiveness for being a petulant child, just angry, upset. I don't like what's going on. I don't like what's happening in the world. And that's been my dilemma. Rather than having I guess I can hear what other people are saying, and maybe that's affecting my thought process about what's going on. But I find myself being the person I'm having to fight more than hearing someone else say something to me that would be offensive.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, I really like what you said. Just I'm looking inward versus looking outward. So I think that's a good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Elder Thaddeus talks about it when he talks about thoughts too. It can be difficult to discern, though, too, with our thoughts, and what the correct course of action is, or what God is trying to tell us. You know, recently, of course, what has been one of the most polarizing events in our country is, obviously the election. People are just divided. Our country is divided, but not just our, when our country is divided, we're all divided. People within our church, you think about division in churches because of this, and fights that break out, and social media only amplifies it, in addition to the pandemic. So we have all of this noise coming at us constantly, whether it's on a screen or in person, or on TV, whatever. And it's hard to know what the truth is anymore, and we have to focus on the gospel and realize that's first and foremost the truth. That's not changing. There's no way around it. There's no election on whether or not Jesus Christ, is God. But this is, it's exhausting, right? I mean, it's you're sitting there and you're in a battle, with hundreds of different things, with your own thoughts. First of all, you're saying, at least if I can shut out what people are saying on the outside, at least I'll be by myself with my thoughts. Like, a lot of times, like, I say, when my kids are being loud, and I'm trying to focus, I can't even hear myself think. So, like, when I'm distracted like that with outward noise, I'm not even acknowledging what's going on in my brain, number one, in my heart, what my soul is going through, because we so rarely think about that we're not just flesh and blood, we're spiritual beings as well. We have a soul inside of us that animates us and keeps us alive, and does all those things. And we don't think about the state of that. We think about our physical state, because that's what's most appealing to us. And there's, feelings and pleasure and displeasure and all that stuff. And we forget that our soul is what is kind of being tugged at here from the forces of evil, and trying to take us away from God. And when I get frustrated while my kids are being loud, and I'm trying to either do something or talk to Presbytera or something, say something important to her, and I scream out and I say, I can't even hear myself think. I don't even know what I was just saying before that, if I'm so distracted. So it's important to look inwardly too, and to think about, not even just think about, to acknowledge what is going on in our soul. Because if our soul is at peace, then we're, as he describes in number 1, and says, someone who's peaceful and quiet, their soul is at peace. Their whole, their heart and their mind are at peace. And that's how they can, that's why there's someone who can cover things with love, and be a person who's an example that we can strive to be like.
Father, I think this particular chapter was really hard for me, because I'm thinking all the other chapters we can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
A monastic life is something that's kind of hard to relate to for, at least for myself, and I'm thinking most of us don't lead a monastic life in the sense of a monastery and like the monastics do. So I thought to myself, what was his purpose in including this chapter in the book for us, since most of us don't have that experience of being a monastic? What's his purpose, do you think, in including this? Do you think it's the thought process? Do you think it's the closing out everything and just focusing on one thing? There has to be a purpose, because like I said, most of us, I feel like most of us I cannot relate to this chapter about monasticism.
Well, let's thank you for bringing that up. I want to read number 4, the paragraph, and then we can talk about it, because I think that relates kind of to your question, because he kind of addresses that too. And so here's number 4. It is easier in a monastery. Here we are free from all the shocking things of the world. There are few connections with the outside world, and that is a good thing. Of course, much depends on the person. That which is required of monks and nuns is also required of lay people. Even the Holy Fathers say that the only difference between monastics and lay people is that lay people are married. It is easier for monastics, for they do not bear the burdens of married life. They do not have to strive to raise children or to be good Christians and lead them onto the right path. A monk strives for himself only. Of course, he must pray for the whole world, but it is much easier for him. But a layperson can achieve a much higher level of spirituality in meekness and humility than one who has lived as a monk in celibacy all his life, yet has not striven to achieve perfection. He who does not pray has no use for a holy place or holy things. Okay, so there's a lot there. So so it's interesting that he says that the only difference between monastics and lay people, meaning us, kind of people living in the world outside of monasteries, is that we're married. So I think let's take it further. It's not just people who are married, because some of us aren't married, right? I would say that the difference is, yes, we have the option to be married, but also marriage itself, or relationships with men with women, women with men, it's complicated. It's more complicated than having to focus on just yourself. Marriage, and I understand why he says marriage here, because marriage really is a big deal. Marriage is not just a service that we do and a piece of paper that we have saying that we're married. It's a much, much deeper call. Marriage, a man and a woman, are called to lead each other to paradise. It's not just we live together, we play house, we have kids, it's fun, it's this and that. We have a deep call as people who are married to lead our significant other towards paradise through our actions, through how we live our lives, but also as companions together. So it's not easier. One might say, well, if I have a companion helping me get to paradise, well, I should have it easier. Well, no, it's not, because 2 people complicates things. More than one person complicates things. Your spouse has wishes other than yours, has dreams other than yours, and wants to do things in life that may differ from what you want to do. And then, once you have children thrown into the mix as well, like he says, your calling goes even further. So you're still called to help your spouse get to paradise, but now you're responsible to bring more human beings with you and to raise human beings to be followers of Christ and to teach them how to be followers of Christ. But here lies the most difficult part. How can we as parents teach our children to be followers of Christ if we ourselves are not followers of Christ? Truly. That's where it's difficult. And that's why I think he acknowledges here that for a monk, it's easier. A monk is in a dedicated place to do what he is there to do. And he said, and it's interesting here that he defines that being a monk is not praying for myself all day and praying for my salvation as a monk all day. It's for praying for the world, he says. So, while our call, those of us who are married or preparing to get married or thinking of even marriage or even dating someone, our call is to help bring others around us or someone around us to paradise, to lead each other to paradise. Where a monk's responsibility or goal or whatever you want to call it is to pray for the world, and to pray that God gives peace to the world. And that can be, I don't know, for me, that feels difficult. It definitely doesn't feel as daunting as, trying to teach my children how to be followers of Christ and what that means. But, he says that a monk strives for himself only. And he says that, a layperson, a person in the world can achieve a higher level of spirituality in meekness and humility than a monk who lives in celibacy all his life. Well, based on the experiences we have in the world. And the first thing he says too, that, that monks in a monastery are free from all the shocking things of the world. You think about the pandemic. You think Mount Athos has a TV and they're watching CNN and learning about the numbers in the pandemic? No. If they hear anything, it's from a visitor, and I don't know if they're even closed right now. I don't think they are. I know, I heard that there were some cases there, but that's not their worry. That's not their burden. The shocking things of this world, the politics and whatever else, everything that are here in the world that we constantly read about, hear about on our phones, on our social media, they're free of all of those things. Their sole focus is on God. And, in many ways, our calling in the world is much harder because we have to do what they're doing, but ignore those shocking things, and also interact with one another peacefully, and somehow keep God as our focus, in this craziness and this chaos that is the world. But, also, I take what he says in number 5 that we said that that even if you go to the monastery and it's peaceful and quiet there, it doesn't mean that they don't have struggles where we have struggles of the world. And, like this generation's favorite thing to say is first world problems when they complain about, their cell phone breaking. Their problems are more spiritual, and they're being attacked spiritually and having to overcome that and continue to pray for the world. And they also, like we said, we don't know for sure, but they're still human beings. They're not perfect just because they live in a monastery. I'm sure they have quarrels with each other, and they're all from different places or whatever. But they, depending on their abbot, they're of one mind. They understand that the monastery, why they're there and why the monastery is there. And, you hope that they understand that and live that way. So, Becky, Becky's not there. I wanted her to remind me of exactly what she said. Oh, she said that she couldn't relate to this chapter. That's right. So, I think he gives us an idea of this definition of monasticism, because it's also there, and we have to acknowledge that it's there, but also like the good things that we have, many of the good things that we have can be a result of those prayers of the monks in the monasteries. They're constantly praying for peace and joy in the world. And when we get those doses of peace and joy, you have to understand that part of that is the fruit of their prayer, and through their prayers, we constantly ask for our saints to pray for us. And, in the monasteries, they literally pray every day. I mean, there are services every day. So we have to understand that monasticism is not so much our opposite of how we live, but it's a different way that Christians, that other Christians are living, and they're called to a different call than we are in the world. But we have to understand that the thing we have in common is our prayer, and I think that's why in the last sentence in number 4 he says, "He who does not pray has no use for our holy place or holy things." I think he means kind of like, no matter where you are, if you're a monk in a monastery or a person living in the world, if you don't pray, there's no reason for you, there's no use for anything holy where you are. Prayer is the reason for all of that. And I think that's the thing that ties us together, as Orthodox Christians. Just because they're monks and we're in the world, we're of the same faith. It speaks to his idea that, the monks in the monastery, though they're different, they come together. And that's why, when faithful people of the world visit a monastery, it's this coming together of these two worlds. And it works because we're all Orthodox Christians. We're all praying to God. Whatever our life is different, but we have those things in common. Does that help at all? I don't know if Becky's still with us, but does anyone have any comments? This is a big section.
Hey, Father. It's Mary Ann.
Mary.
I really thought that was very interesting. I think this whole chapter to me is very interesting because honestly, I never thought about monks having problems or monks having a battlefield. I mean, I would just think it's all, heavenly, and like Elder Thaddeus said, you go to a monastery and think that all is peaceful and quiet there, but it's not. It's a battlefield there too. And all of us have this human battle. No matter if we're even in the monastery, there's still evil to overcome, and there's ourselves to overcome in Christ. So everybody has got it.
Yeah, I mean, I called today. We had a funeral at the church, for any of you who knew Melanie Meehan, and I bring to mind part of the funeral service prayer at the end, where we say that Christ, we say, "You alone are without sin." For no one there is no one who lives and does not sin. You alone are without sin. Your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and the word is truth. So the monasteries, although they are, I think, a piece and a glimpse into what heaven is like, where there is constant praising of God and there's constant prayer to God. We also remember that he is the only sinless one. And monasteries are still a part of the earth. They are still a part of this imperfect world and broken world and fallen world. So they are not perfect, and we can't elevate them that way. But because they are constantly praying, we can take that example, and that's St. Paul's pray unceasingly, put into action. Now, for them, like he says, it's easier because of where they are. For us, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but we have things like the prayer of the heart, the Jesus prayer, that we can recite in our mind all the time, and in our hearts. So I liked reading that. I thought it was interesting because I keep thinking it's interesting because we discuss sort of an idea one week, and then somehow it comes up in the next chapter, almost as if the elders kind of like leading us to this conversation. So like we talked about like in one of the chapters, I think the second chapter, we talked about humility, and then the next week that was the topic. Like again here we talked about we talked about how the monastic life is different from our lives in the world. We've talked about it a few of the weeks in past, and here it comes up, and he actually addresses it directly, like what we were talking about. Like, is it easier in a monastery or is it easier in the world? And his answer is it's easier in the monastery, I think, from his perspective. But like I think I said it last week, kind of apples and oranges. Like I understand his explanation of why it's easier, but I feel like it's different. It's like saying, I don't know. I mean, life in the world and life in a monastery are totally different. You can't compare the two and say, here are the similarities. The only similarity is prayer. I mean, that's what we have in common. And of course, our faith and our dogma and all of that. But it's hard to compare the two because they're different. I agree that it's more difficult. Our mission, out here is more difficult, but they have their difficulties too. Like he's saying in number 5, it's a battlefield, and the battlefield there is more spiritual. And for us, it's more it's spiritual out here, but it's also physical. We have physical barriers that are trying to keep us from God. So I thought that was interesting.
Father,
Maria?
this is what I wanted to add, though, because I was thinking about this, is that how can we even think that they have it easier? Because I think that the evil one would try to even try to do the undoing of what they have in the monastery. Did I make myself clear?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that makes complete sense. I think what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the mission they have to pray for the world is so important that, of course, it's hard. They're probably attacked, very hard there by the evil one, so that they can't pray for the world.
Yes.
And I think that's why I'm saying, like, we're comparing apples and oranges. I think if we were to define it strictly, their difficulty is spiritual, and our difficulty, is spiritual plus physical.
Yes.
And that's not to say they wouldn't have like a physical, problem or temptation or whatever.
Right.
But we have all of, like he says, all of those shocking things that happen in the world where they don't. I mean, there are monasteries that have been there for hundreds of years and have not changed beyond like upkeep, beyond, keeping it from falling into the ocean, off of a cliff. So, I mean, there's something to be said about the monasteries, and of course, have their place in the world, you know? So that's an interesting point.
Father, I want to
Mhm.
bring up this discussion reminds me of that great book, Everyday Saints.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've read it, but
I haven't. It's on my bookshelf. It's on my list.
it has a lot of great short stories, really, but it captures some of this kind of normal problems that monastics have. It covers roughly, stories about maybe 100-year history of mostly one or a few Russian monasteries. So, the characters in there are not the true saints that we read about. They're more, normal monks trying to, go through life and the challenges they have. So the stories and some of the small miracles that come out are really, really powerful because it puts it in that kind of more human perspective,
Mhm.
at least for me.
I have to read that. I know it's a very thick book, but yeah, I'm gonna have to get it off the bookshelf.
Father,
Yes,
can I add a thought here?
absolutely.
I thought this was one of the more potent chapters. I enjoyed this one very much because I find the aspect of humility has many levels to it. There's a level, and Elder Thaddeus, I think, is approaching the element of love in humility. But there's also, I think, from what I read, an element of honesty, being honest with oneself in humility. And I've had experiences like that in business, where falling back on the aspect of honesty in a difficult situation has gotten me through certain difficult situations at work in business.
Can you expound on him? I mean, you don't have to give
Yeah.
specifics,
No,
but
no, I can. I actually have covered it a couple of times. I see some people who've been with me in many of the classes that I've done. In the live classes, I've covered it. It was a situation where this was at Sears, and I made a major mistake in purchasing and using the money allotted to me, and there was an opportunity to take advantage of a great program in purchasing, and I couldn't make the purchase because I screwed up with the accounting of my open to buy. And the controller came down to talk to me about it, and I got very nervous. I thought I was going to lose my job there. And my first reaction was to tell him that I screwed up. When he came into my office, he was very upset. Okay, and he came around behind my desk, and I told him I out and out screwed up. I don't have money to buy this deal that's being offered us from a factory, which would have been a great opportunity for our customers. It would have been a big sale deal. And as he stood over me, he just looked at my plan. He said, if I move some of the money from here to there, would that be enough? Would that help you? And I said, yeah. And so he found the money for me. All right. And I always looked at it that it was from a position of being upfront and honest that I had screwed up,
mm-hmm.
rather than being defensive about it. I could have come up with some excuses, I think.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was a motivational speaker named Zig Ziglar. I don't know if anybody ever heard of him.
What a name.
Yeah. Dimitri, you've heard of him, right? He was in Charlotte years back. And I read every book he wrote, and I attended every lecture that I could, especially the ones where he came to Charlotte. And he wrote I was on the first row, and he just came up before he started talking to me. I told him what my position at Sears, and he just questioned me about buying. He said, he's doing a new book, and if I had any stories I could give him. And I gave him this story that I just told you. And sure enough, he put it in his book. And I get a call about a year later. The editors from Reader's Digest called me that they were looking for, the editor was writing a thing on business, the 5 key elements of business. And they were able to find stories on 4 of the 5 elements. The last element they couldn't find a story on. And then she said she read Zig Ziglar's book and read the story of what happened here. And she has permission to put it in the Reader's Digest. And the element was they couldn't find any stories related to honesty in business.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. Very nice. What was I going to say? I completely lost my train of thought just now.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's
No, not because of
2 weeks
you.
in a row I did that to you.
Not because of you. I'm sorry. No, I think I was going to say, do we have any kind of last remarks? I thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Is there anyone who didn't speak who would like to speak? Maybe Rita.
I always have to say.
He's on camera.
I just wanted to say that, number 5 with the battlefield and how it was saying about, with when people get married, they think it's smooth, but it's like a battlefield, and that's how it is in the monasteries. And, you really, like you were saying earlier, you never picture a monastery as a battlefield, but I think it's more, like I visited monasteries, and there was a few times where I actually witnessed a couple of monks, like kind of going at it, a little bit. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, it's like, oh, it's not only spiritually, but they are like us. They go at it also. They try not to in front of people, I'm sure. And, but it really makes this book more human, more relatable because of that. And I think he threw this chapter in so that we can see that not only, are we human, but like the monastics, even though we have them on a higher level, they're also human, and they also have the same battles that we have.
Yeah. I think, I completely agree. I think, and we'll kind of wrap up here, but I think that's exactly the reason he put this chapter in here. We have to think this is not Elder Thaddeus putting this together, but I think the author, whoever compiled these, put this in there so that we can, but Elder Thaddeus said these things, so that we can get a glimpse of what monastic life is like. I think for many of us in the world, I didn't grow up going to monasteries much, let alone seeing the life. I've served a few times now at the Troy Monastery, being here in North Carolina. But before that, I never really, I knew what I knew about the monastic life through reading, not seeing ever. But I think he gives this a glimpse so that, we who are reading this, people of the world, can get a glimpse of that. Because I think for a lot of us, the monastic life and monasteries are a very like far idea from our mind. Like we don't really understand exactly what happens there beyond, that they're praying and they have a lot of services, and, they have nice bookstores and incense and icons, and, there are people there, and there are, human beings there living just as complex as each and every one of us. And they're all trying to do the same thing we're called to do in a different setting and in different circumstances. And I think that's why he puts this chapter in here so that we can remember too that, I keep thinking of that thing that he talks about in number 2, where he says that gradually they become of one mind and one thought, or one mind and thought in the monasteries. But I think he put this in here so that we can understand, as Orthodox Christians, we're also of one mind and one heart, that, we should be praying to God for everything, just like monks do, but in our setting, in the world, in how we experience God, and how we turn to him in our various different ways, especially through prayer. So thank you, Rita. And I think we'll wrap up there. Like I said, like the shortest chapter, like this took me 5 minutes to read, but we had a whole conversation about it over an hour. So that's great. I really love that. Next week, we're going to talk about the chapter on repentance. It's going to be our last Zoom meeting for this, whatever you want to call it, semester, for the fall, until after the holidays. God willing, after the holidays, when we talk about our plan for adult religious education, I think it would be really nice to do a part 2 and continue with the book. I know many of you are probably going to continue reading even after we finish. So, I think it'll give us an opportunity to at least discuss those things if you do continue reading. And even if you don't, we'll still be, you'll still have the opportunity to read and discuss when we get together. So thank you all. Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you for reaching out and saying Konya Pola, and thank you for coming to church on the feast day. It was a real blessing for me too. Having it be my feast day and being in a church that is dedicated to Saint Nektarios is such a blessing for me. And the day holds a lot of meaning for me, and I just wanted to say thank you, and I hope God blesses you all, and I hope we all have the intercessions of Saint Nektarios, especially as we're continuing our journey through the pandemic, through the election, through as Elder Thaddeus says, the shocking things of this world. And I pray that we all band together and, like he says, become of one mind and one thought, and keep our minds and our thoughts on Christ. And from there, God will steer us in the right direction. So God bless all of you. Have a wonderful, blessed rest of your evening. And I'll see you all very soon.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Bob.